Welcome to Starbound. My name is the Voice Ogre. I'll be your narrator today. But before we get started with the video, let me ask to see if you're subscribed real quick. If you're not, it's fine, but it's free, and it will let you know whenever we post new videos. Thank you. Foravian Bile II carefully adjusted the focus on his diagnostic scanner, his feather wings rippling with concentration as he studied the latest test results from his bacterial culture research. The quiet hum of Station Medical 7's research wing surrounded him, punctuated by the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and the occasional rustle of fellow researchers moving between labs. A sudden alert shattered his focus, the station's emergency signal flooding the lab with pulsing amber light. His head crest instinctively flattened as the announcement echoed through the corridors.
Multiple critical trauma cases inbound. All available medical staff report to emergency reception.
Foravian's talons clicked against the polished floor as he hurried through the corridors, already running through preparation protocols in his mind. The research wing connected directly to the hospital section, one of the many efficient design elements that made Station Medical 7 the premier medical facility in this sector. As he approached the emergency department, he could hear his father's distinct voice rising above the controlled chaos.
"I want 3 stasis pods prepared,"
Dr. Bile commanded, his pristine white feathers practically glowing under the medical lights.
"Full diagnostic array on standby. And someone tell me what exactly we're dealing with."
The emergency coordinator, a junior physician whose name Foravian could never quite remember, pulled up a holographic display.
A colonial vessel attacked by pirates. Most casualties...
She paused, checking her data.
Most casualties are human.
Foravian noticed his father's head crest, a subtle tell which few would recognize. Humans were still relatively new to the galactic community, and the station had limited experience treating them. This could prove challenging. The first pods arrived moments later, bursting through the atmospheric containment field in a rush of emergency propulsion. Medical teams swarmed each one, but Foravian found himself drawn to the third pod. Its occupant, visible through the transparent cover, bore the worst injuries he had ever seen on a living being.
"This one's critical,"
Nurse Rain called out, her efficient movements belaying the urgency in her voice.
"Multiple compound fractures, severe tissue damage, possible internal injuries."
Foravian moved closer, his diagnostic scanner already gathering data. The human's body was a map of trauma. Bones jutting out at impossible angles, tissues torn and swollen. By any reasonable medical standards, his condition was terminal.
"Identity confirmed,"
another nurse announced.
"Damien Lorien, Colonial Security. Found defending the escape pod launch bay."
"Get him to critical care 3.
Dr. Bile I ordered, and then turned to his son.
"Foravian, you have the most recent human physiology certifications. This one's yours."
"Yes, father." Foravian responded automatically, then caught himself. Yes, Dr. Bile." His father's head crest raised slightly. Amusement or irritation, Foravian could never quite tell. But there was no time to dwell on it as they rushed the pod toward critical care. The patient's vital signs were stable, barely, and they were maintained by the pod's stasis field. But they couldn't quite keep him in stasis indefinitely.
"Dr. Bile!"
A voice called from behind them. Both Foravian and his father turned, creating a moment of confusion before they realized the speaker. A human female with minor injuries being treated in triage. She was trying to get their attention.
"That's my friend in there,"
she said, attempting to rise despite a nurse trying to keep her seated.
"Damien, I need to know if he's going to be all right."
"Dr. Bile will keep you informed,"
Foravian's father said smoothly, gesturing to his son.
"The second, that is. He's handling the case."
"Auburn Gray," she introduced herself, finally allowing the nurse to finish treating her wounds.
"Please,
he saved all our lives." Foravian's wing feathers rustled with shared concern. "We'll do everything we can, Miss Gray. But first, we need to assess the full extent of his injuries." As they wheeled the pod into Critical Care 3, Foravian's mind was already cataloging procedures, calculating survival probabilities, considering treatment options. But beneath the clinical analysis, a small voice whispered that this case might prove more interesting than he anticipated. Foravian meticulously adjusted the bioscanner sensitivity, compensating for the differences in human baseline readings. Critical Care 3 hummed with activity as the medical team worked to transfer Damien from the stasis pod to the treatment bed. Every movement had to be precisely controlled. One wrong shift could worsen the already devastating injuries. "Neural activity stable. Nurse Rain reported, monitoring the displays. Minimal degradation from stasis. Ready to begin detailed assessment. The stasis field dissipated gradually, allowing Faravian to get his first unfiltered scan of the damage. Multiple fractures along the left arm and leg. Several showing compound breaks where bone had torn through muscle and skin. Severe crushing trauma to the thoracic cavity. Internal bleeding in at least 3 distinct regions. Fascinating architecture, Faravian muttered, studying the bone structure displayed in the holographic display. The cellular matrix is unlike anything in our database.
Focus on treatment, not research.
His father's voice cut in from the doorway. Dr. Bile I entered with his usual precise movements, automatically commanding attention from the medical team.
The patient's condition?
Critical, but stable, Faravian reported, unconsciously straightening his posture. The stasis field preserved vital functions, but these injuries... He gestured to the most severe compound fracture, with splintered bone protruded through the forearm. Some of this damage looks to be permanent.
Then we'll need to consider cybernetic replacements, his father declared. Standard procedure for injuries of this magnitude.
With respect, Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain interjected. Human medical records indicate they often recover from similar trauma without prosthetics. Their healing processes
are poorly documented and largely theoretical,
Dr. Bile I dismissed.
We deal in medical facts, not speculation.
Faravian's wing feathers twitched with familiar frustration. Father, Dr. Bile, I mean, perhaps we should consult with Miss Gray. She might have relevant information about human medical response. His father's head crest flattened slightly. Definitely irritation this time, but he nodded.
Fine. Nurse Rain, please escort Miss Gray here. Ensure contamination protocols.
While they waited, Faravian continued his scans, paying particular attention to the cellular activity around the injury sites. Something about the readings seemed odd, but he couldn't quite identify what. The bone fragments, despite their severe displacement, showed unusual signs of... Oh, stars! Auburn gasped as she entered, seeing Damien's injuries fully exposed. She steadied herself against the doorframe, her face paling. I knew it was bad, but... Miss Gray. Faravian turned to her, keeping his voice gentle. We need to understand human healing capabilities. In our experience, injuries of this severity would require extensive cybernetic replacement. Is this standard for humans as well? Auburn shook her head. No, not usually. I mean, sometimes for really severe cases, but... She moved closer to the bed, careful to stay out of the medical team's way. I've seen soldiers recover from worse. It takes time, but humans are pretty good at healing.
Time?
Dr. Bile I's head crest rose skeptically. How much time? Depends on the injury. Broken bones usually take 6 to 8 weeks to fully heal, although something like this might take longer. She gestured to Damien's chest. Internal injuries can be faster or slower, depending on the type. Faravian and his father exchanged looks. 8 weeks? For injuries that would take most species months or years to recover from, if they recovered at all.
Impossible,
Dr. Bile I declared.
The energy requirements would be...
Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain interrupted. You need to see this. The scanner display showed the first bone fragments beginning to align. Microscopic filaments of tissue already reaching across the breaks. It was barely noticeable, the kind of change that would take days to see in most species. It had been less than 4 hours since they removed the stasis field. Start recording. Faravian II ordered, his wing feathers quivering with excitement. Maximum resolution. Document everything. 3 days of continuous observation had left Faravian's feathers ruffled and his eyes dry from staring at scanner readings. It barely left Critical Care 3, except when Nurse Rain physically shooed him out to rest. The data coming from their patient defied everything he thought he knew about biological healing. Look at this density increase, he said to his father, who had finally deigned to examine his findings in detail. The holographic display showed a time-lapse of the worst compound fracture, where new bone material was already bridging the gaps between fragments. The cellular activity is orders of magnitude faster than any documented healing process. Dr. Bile I studied the readings with characteristic intensity, his head crest twitching as he processed the information.
And could be an artifact of the scanning equipment. Human biology often produces anomalous readings.
I have calibrated and recalibrated, Faravian countered, pulling up comparison scans. I've used 3 different scanning methods. The results are consistent. The human healing process is actively knitting the bone back together.
That's impossible,
his father declared, though with less certainty than usual.
The energy requirements
would be massive, yes, Faravian interrupted, earning a sharp look. But look at his metabolic readings. The cellular absorption rate, the oxygen consumption. His body is perfectly adapted for this kind of regeneration. Nurse Rain entered with her usual quiet efficiency, carrying fresh sensor packs. Miss Gray is here again, she announced. She brought some human medical documentation that might be relevant. Auburn had been visiting daily, splitting her time between checking on Damien and helping the medical team understand human physiology. She entered carrying a datapad, her own injuries now mostly healed. Another example of human recovery that had caught Faravian's attention. I found some case studies, she said, handing the pad to Faravian. Similar injuries from mining accidents back on Mars. It might help you understand what to expect. Faravian's wing feathers rustled with excitement as he scrolled through the documents. This is extraordinary. The recovery time frames, they're consistent with what we're seeing. Father, Dr. Bile, look at these baseline healing rates. His father took the pad, scanning it with gradually widening eyes.
This can't be standard. These must be exceptional cases.
No? Auburn shook her head. This is pretty normal for humans. Actually, Damien's healing is a bit slower than usual because of how severe the injuries are. A simple break would be showing a lot more progress by now.
Slower?
Dr. Bile the First's head crest flattened completely.
You're saying this accelerated regeneration is below average?
A weak cough from the bed interrupted their discussion. Damien's first signs of consciousness since arriving. Everyone froze, watching as his eyes flickered beneath their lids. Careful, Nurse Rain warned as Faravian moved closer with the scanner. His pain medication might be wearing off. Damien's eyes opened briefly, unfocused and glazed. His lips moved, forming words too quiet to hear. Auburn stepped closer, leaning in. Water, she translated. He's asking for water.
Absolutely not,
Dr. Bile the First declared.
Not with the internal injuries of this magnitude. The risk of...
Actually, Faravian interrupted again, checking his latest scans. The internal soft tissue damage is already showing significant healing. Small amounts of water should be safe. He glanced at his father. Unless you disagree with the scanning data. His father's feathers ruffled with familiar irritation, but Faravian noticed something else in his expression, a grudging curiosity.
Proceed with caution, he finally said. Document everything.
As Nurse Rain carefully helped Damien take small sips of water, Faravian continued studying the scan data. The bone healing was remarkable enough, but the soft tissue regeneration. If they could understand how humans achieved this level of natural healing... Dr. Bile! A voice called from the doorway. Both Faravians turned automatically, causing another moment of confusion. A junior researcher stood there, looking uncertainly between them. The second, she clarified. Your bacterial cultures are showing signs of contamination. The lab needs you to...
Go,
his father said before Faravian could protest.
I'll monitor the patient.
He gestured to the scanner readings.
This requires further study.
The research lab felt confining after days spent in Critical Care 3, but Faravian forced himself to focus on his bacterial cultures. His previous work seemed almost trivial now compared to the medical revelations happening just down the hall. Still, proper documentation required attention to all ongoing projects. Your father's been in there 6 hours straight, Nurse Rain noted as she entered, carrying a fresh stack of data crystals. I don't think I've ever seen him so... She paused, searching for the right word. Obsessed? Faravian suggested, his wing feathers twitching with amusement. And now he knows how I feel. Fascinated, she corrected gently. He's reviewing the historical case files from Earth's medical database. Did you know that humans used to set broken bones with strips of tree bark? Faravian's head crest rose sharply. Primitive medical tech, and they still achieved these healing rates. How did they survive long enough to develop space travel? That's what I've been trying to explain, Auburn said from the doorway. She'd taken to spending time in the lab when she wasn't visiting Damien, her natural curiosity making her an excellent source of medical human history. We didn't develop advanced medicine because we needed it to heal. We developed it to heal faster, to manage pain and to prevent infection. The healing itself, that's just us.
Remarkable, Nurse Rain murmured, adjusting one of the scanner calibrations.
No wonder your species expanded so quickly once you reached space. Most races need extensive medical support for even minor injuries. Any and all minor mistakes could be catastrophic for those involved.
Faravian pulled up the latest scan results, showing 2 weeks of progressive bone healing. The compound fractures were steadily knitting back together. New bone growth bridging the gaps at a pace that still seemed impossible despite all the evidence.
In my defense training, Auburn offered, they taught us that humans are really good at not dying. As our instructor put it. You can break us, burn us, cut us, but as long as you don't kill us outright, we usually bounce back.
Defense training? Faravian's father asked from the entrance, making them all jump. He moved to examine the latest scans, his pristine feathers almost glowing under the lab lights. You're military.
Colonial security, Auburn corrected. Basic combat and first aid. So I met Damien. We were in the same training rotation.
Dr. Bile I's head crest twitched thoughtfully. The human capacity for recovery would be a significant tactical advantage. How many of your historical battles were won by simply outlasting the enemy?
Father, Faravian interrupted. Perhaps we should focus on the medical implications rather than military applications.
The medical implications are military applications, his father countered. Think, boy. A species that can recover from nearly any non-fatal injury? That can keep fighting long after others have fallen? The galaxy's combat medicine protocols are based on species that need immediate intensive care for even minor trauma.
Which is why this research is so important, Faravian pressed. If we can understand how human healing works...
Dr. Bile! A young intern burst into the lab, looking between father and son in confusion.
The second,
Nurse Rain clarified quickly.
Yes, right, the intern continued. Your patient's awake. Really awake this time. He's asking about his injuries.
Faravian moved quickly to the door, but his father's voice stopped him. A moment. Dr. Bile I turned to Auburn. You said humans are good at not dying. What exactly does that mean?
Auburn considered the question. Well, there's an old Earth saying. It's... what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It's not just about healing. We actually get tougher from surviving hardship. Break a bone, heals back stronger than before. Build up calluses, skin gets thicker. Even our immune systems adapt to new threats.
Both Faravians stared at her, head crests rising in synchronized shock. Are you saying, Dr. Bile I asked slowly, that trauma makes humans more resilient?
Within reason, Auburn shrugged. You can't just keep breaking someone's arm and expecting it to turn into steel or anything, but yeah, we adapt. It's kind of our thing.
Incredible, Faravian breathed.
And then he remembered why they were interrupted. The patient, we should...
Yes, his father waved a wing. Let's go. But we will discuss this adaptation later. As they hurried toward Critical Care 3, Faravian noticed his father's feathers were slightly ruffled. A sure sign that he was deeply disturbed by something. Not that Faravian could blame him. Everything they knew about trauma response was being challenged. They found Damien propped up slightly in his bed, looking pale but alert. His eyes tracked them as they entered, focusing on their alien features with remarkable clarity for someone who had been unconscious for 2 weeks. So, he said, voice rough from disuse, either I'm hallucinating or I'm in a youth medical facility.
Station Medical 7, Faravian confirmed, moving to check his vital signs. You were brought here after...
a pirate attack. Yeah, I remember that. Damien winced slightly as he tried to move. How bad? Dr. Bile I stepped forward, his medical manner taking over. Multiple compound fractures, severe internal trauma. By our medical standards, your injuries should have been permanently debilitating. But they're not, Damien stated rather than asked. Because I'm human. Yes, both Faravians answered simultaneously, their head crests rising in shared excitement. Damien managed a weak smile. Let me guess, you've never treated a human before.
Not one with injuries this severe, Faravian admitted. Your healing rate is unprecedented in our experience.
It's pretty standard for us,
Damien said, unconsciously echoing Auburn's earlier words.
Well, I gotta say, I never thought I'd end up as an alien science project. Medical study,
Dr. Bao the First corrected primly.
Though I must admit it is fascinating.
Faravian Bill II knew his father well enough that him saying that is equivalent to declaring a medical revolution. 3 days after regaining consciousness, Damien was already trying to sit up on his own. Faravian watched with a mixture of fascination and horror as his patient grimaced through another attempt. Monitors beeped warnings about elevated heart rate and blood pressure. You should be resting, Faravian chided, adjusting his scanner arrays. Your bones are still...
Healing,
Damien finished, easing back against the pillows.
But they'll heal better if I stay active. Keeping muscles engaged helps prevent atrophy.
Faravian's head crest flattened. That contradicts every medical protocol we have. Movement during healing risks. Different biology, different rules. Nurse Rain interrupted, entering with fresh medication. The human medical files support his approach. Their healing process actually benefits from controlled stress.
Exactly.
Damien nodded.
Had a broken leg once during basic training, and Doc made me start physical therapy before it was even fully healed. Barbaric,
Dr. Bao the First declared from the doorway. He entered carrying a datapad full of notes, his feathers perfectly groomed, as always.
And yet, effective, apparently. Your previous break healed completely?
Better than ever, Damien confirmed. Callus formation reinforced the bone. Nowadays I can't even remember which leg it was. Both Faravians exchanged looks. The concept of healing stronger than the original state still disturbed them deeply.
Show me,
Dr. Bao the First demanded, moving closer with his own scanner.
That's kind of hard to demonstrate right now.
Damien gestured to his current injuries with his less damaged arm.
I got plenty of old breaks that you can study. Pretty much every big bone in my body has been broken at least once.
Intentionally? Faravian asked, horrified.
Ow. No. Ow. It's just an active life, Sports, military training, fights. You know how it goes.
We really don't. Nurse Rain muttered, checking his medication levels.
The point is, Damien continued, humans are built to take damage and bounce back. It's not about being invulnerable. It's about being able to recover.
A clatter from the hallway drew their attention. Auburn appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath.
Sorry I'm late. I just had to help with the new arrivals. Damien! You're sitting up? Trying to. He grinned. His folks seem to think that I should just lie here and vegetate. We think you should follow proper medical procedure,
Dr. Bao the First corrected stiffly. This is proper procedure for humans, Auburn countered. The faster we get moving, the better we heal. Within reason, she added, seeing Damien shift like he might try standing. Let's not push it too far, yeah? Faravian noticed his father's head crest twitching, as it does whenever his views are seriously challenged. The elder Dr. Bao had been doing that a lot lately.
If movement assists healing,
Dr. Bao the First said slowly,
then our standard treatment protocols for human patients will need significant revision. The implications for energy medicine alone.
Now who's obsessing over the research? Faravian teased, earning a sharp look that quickly softened into something almost like amusement.
Look who's talking, Damien said. You barely left this room in days. Even I noticed. And I was unconscious for most of it.
Speaking of which, Nurse Rain interjected, both Dr. Biles are due for rest periods, which they may have been ignoring. She fixed them with a stern look that somehow worked despite their size difference.
We can't possibly...
Both Faravians began simultaneously. Doctor's orders, she cut them off. And since I'm the only one here acting like a proper medical professional instead of an excited researcher, she let the threat hang.
Go on.
Damien waved his good arm.
I promise not to heal anything interesting while you're gone.
As they left Critical Care 3, Faravian noticed his father was muttering calculations under his breath. Probably trying to work out the energy requirements for human healing rates again. They'd both been struggling with mathematical models. Nothing quite added up by their equations. Faravian adjusted his quantum microscope's resolution, his wing feathers quivering with excitement as he studied the tissue sample. The cellular behavior was unlike anything in their medical database. Complex chains of specialized cells working in perfect synchronization to rebuild damaged tissue. The energy efficiency is remarkable, he noted, recording his observations. Look at how the osteoblasts coordinate with the surrounding tissue. It's not just healing, it's a complete reconstruction of the damaged area.
Made possible by their unique metabolism,
his father added, studying his own set of readings. The elder Dr. Bile had commandeered half the research lab for their ongoing study, his usually pristine workspace now cluttered with data crystals and sample analyses. A soft chime indicated another incoming transmission, the fourth this morning. Word of their research had spread through the medical community, drawing attention from specialists across the sector.
Dr. Bile,
the holographic caller asked, looking between them in confusion. The second, Faravian clarified automatically. These calls were becoming routine.
Yes, right. The Centaurian Medical Academy is very interested in your findings regarding human cellular regeneration. The implications for...
Send your questions through official channels. I've heard enough talk about implications.
Dr. Bile the First interrupted, not looking up from his work.
We're still conducting primary research.
The caller persisted.
But surely you could share some preliminary data. The recorded healing rates seem impossible.
Which is precisely why we're being thorough, Faravian explained diplomatically. We'll publish our findings when they're properly documented. After ending the call, Faravian noticed his father staring intently at a tissue sample. Something interesting?
Their inflammatory response,
Dr. Bile the First said, adjusting a scanner.
We initially assumed it was infection-related. But look at this protein synthesis pattern. The inflammation actively supports the healing process.
Nurse Rain entered, carrying fresh samples from their patient. Damien's asking when he can start physical therapy again. I told him 3 successful days of basic movement first.
2 days,
Damien's voice carried from the hallway.
I did fine yesterday and today.
You nearly fell, Auburn's voice followed.
Horseshoes and hand grenades.
Faravian's head crest twitched with amusement as they entered, Damien walking carefully with Auburn's support. His healing injuries clearly painful, but his determination unwavering.
You should be in bed,
Dr. Bile the First said without real conviction. They'd all learned that keeping a healing human inactive was virtually impossible.
I needed to stretch my legs,
Damien grinned, easing himself into a chair.
Besides, I thought you might want to see this.
He carefully rolled up his sleeve, revealing the massive surgical scar where they'd repaired his compound fracture. The wound was healing cleanly, new skin already forming.
Extraordinary,
Dr. Bile the First murmured, scanner whirring.
The scar tissue is adapting to maintain flexibility. Most species would develop rigid colloidal formations.
That's humans for you. We always heal up real good, Auburn said proudly. More than good, Faravian corrected, showing her the cellular imaging. Your healing processes are revolutionizing our understanding of biological repair mechanisms. I mean, look at this neural regeneration pattern. We thought that this level of recovery was impossible.
The medical consequences are profound, his father added. If we can understand how human cells achieve this efficiency...
He trailed off, realizing everyone was staring at him. What? Nothing, Faravian said innocently. Just noting your enthusiasm for impossible biological processes. His father's feathers ruffled slightly.
A scientist must always follow the evidence, regardless of preconceptions.
He turned back to his work, but Faravian caught the slight rise in his head crest. Amusement, not irritation. Speaking of evidence, Nurse Rain interjected. The station administrator is asking about our resource usage. Apparently, running quantum microscopes 20 hours a day is excessive.
Nonsense,
both Faravians said simultaneously.
We're documenting a medical breakthrough,
Dr. Bile the First continued, which has consumed half the research wing's resources, she pointed out.
Worth it,
Damien commented from his chair. Though I have to ask, why all the fuss? This is pretty normal for humans. Normal for humans is extraordinarily rare for everyone else, Faravian explained, pulling up a comparison chart. Look, this is the standard healing rate for most known species. This is you. The difference is significant.
Unprecedented, Dr. Bile I corrected. Cellular coordination alone should be impossible without extensive medical intervention. And yet your body does it automatically, with minimal external support.
And that's why the Centaurian Medical Academy keeps calling? Auburn asked. Among others, Faravian nodded. Every major medical institution in the sector wants access to our research. Treatment protocols, surgical recovery, trauma care. It changes everything that we thought we knew about medicine. 6 weeks after his arrival at Station Medical 7, Damien completed his first lap around the recovery ward without assistance. Faravian watched through the observation window, scanners recording every aspect of his patient's mobility. The improvement was remarkable. Bones that should have required cybernetic replacement were now supporting weight. Muscles rebuilding themselves with minimal intervention.
His gait is stabilizing, Dr. Bile I noted, reviewing the movement analysis. The bone density in the repaired areas does, in fact, exceed pre-injury levels.
As expected, Faravian replied, earning a surprised look from his father. The human medical records predicted this outcome. Their healing process actively reinforces recovered tissue. Auburn entered carrying drinks. Coffee for Damien, something sweeter for the others. She'd become an unofficial part of their research team. Her practical knowledge of human biology, though far from professional, proved invaluable. The station's medical board is meeting today, she mentioned, distributing the cups. Something about reviewing your research protocols? Both Faravian's head crests flattened instantly. They'd been dreading this meeting. They think we're being excessive, Faravian explained. The resource allocation, the constant monitoring, the detailed documentation.
They don't understand what they're seeing,
his father added with unusual heat.
This isn't just another medical case study. This changes fundamental assumptions about biological recovery.
Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain called from the corridor. Both turned. The first, she clarified. The board is ready. Dr. Bile I straightened his feathers.
Continue monitoring, he instructed his son. Don't let them interrupt the observation.
Actually, Nurse Rain interjected, they want both of you, and the patient. The medical board chamber felt unusually crowded. Representatives from 3 different medical academies had joined the station's regular administrators, their varied forms filling the tiered seating. Damien sat between the Faravians, looking remarkably comfortable for someone at the center of such attention.
Let us be clear, the head administrator began, her scaled fingers tapping against the podium. No one disputes the value of your research. However, the resource expenditure is justified by the results, Dr. Bile I interrupted. We are documenting biological processes that rewrite our understanding of healing.
We have the data, Faravian added, activating the room's holographic display. Time-lapse imagery showed Damien's injuries healing. Bones, knitting, tissue regenerating, even nerve fibers reconnecting. This isn't theory or speculation. This is observable scientific evidence. The room fell silent as they watched 6 weeks of recovery compressed into minutes. Even the administrators seemed stunned by the visual demonstration.
The cost, one began weakly. Is nothing compared to the potential benefits, Dr. Bile I declared. Imagine trauma treatment that supports natural healing instead of replacing damaged tissue. Rehabilitation protocols that work with biological processes instead of against them. The long-term medical value far exceeds our current expenditure if we can find a way to mimic even a fraction of their natural processes.
Besides, Damien spoke up, I'm not exactly an isolated case. Humans are establishing colonies throughout the sector. You're going to need knowledge sooner rather than later. Which brings us to our next point. Faravian continued smoothly. We're preparing to extend the research. With the patient's permission, we'd like to establish a dedicated human medical research division. The administrators exchanged looks. This was clearly more than they'd expected to discuss.
A whole division?
The head administrator asked.
Based on one case? Based on a revolutionary discovery, Dr. Bao I corrected. My son and I are prepared to lead the research personally.
Faravian's head crest rose sharply in surprise. His father hadn't mentioned this plan to him.
Both of you?
One of the Academy representatives asked.
But your current positions can be filled by others,
Dr. Bao I said firmly.
This is more important.
The meeting continued, but Faravian was only half listening. His father, stubborn, traditional, set-in-his-ways father, was completely willing to restructure his career around this research, around their shared discovery. Later, in the research lab, Faravian finally asked the question that had been bothering him. Why didn't you tell me about the division plan? His father's feathers rustled as he adjusted the scanner.
I wasn't certain you'd be interested in a long-term collaboration.
Are you serious? Father, this is the most exciting research I've ever been involved in. Of course I'm interested.
Good,
Dr. Bao I said simply. Then, after a moment,
your mother would be proud, you know, of your work here, of you.
Faravian's throat tightened unexpectedly. His mother had been Station Medical 7's head researcher before her passing. Her portrait still hung in the main corridor. She's proud of both of us, he managed, working together instead of arguing.
Well,
his father's head crest rose slightly.
We still argue. We just do it productively now.
The new Human Medical Research Division took shape faster than anyone expected. What started as a single case study had grown into a dedicated wing of Station Medical 7, complete with specialized monitoring equipment and a steady stream of human patients willing to participate in their studies. The Centaurian delegation arrives tomorrow, Nurse Rain announced, organizing data crystals from their latest round of observations. And 3 more research teams requested access to our protocols this morning. Faravian nodded absently, focused on his scanner readings. Damien's latest physical assessment showed bone density continuing to increase, even 2 months after the initial injuries. The human's recovery time had become their baseline for understanding natural healing processes. It's amazing how far we've come, Auburn said from her new desk. They'd officially hired her as a human biological consultant, her practical knowledge proving invaluable as they expanded their research. 2 months ago, and you didn't even know humans could heal like this.
Speaking of healing,
Dr. Bao I entered carrying fresh scans.
Our newest patient is showing similar recovery patterns. The statistical consistency is remarkable.
Their second major case had arrived a week ago. It's a human construction worker with multiple fractures from an industrial incident. His recovery was following almost exactly the same progression they documented with Damien. It's not just the bones, Faravian added, pulling up the comparison data. The soft tissue regeneration, nerve reactivation, even the inflammatory responses, they're all functionally identical. We can actually predict healing timeframes now.
Which means that we can start developing proper treatment protocols,
his father concluded.
Support the natural process instead of trying to override it.
Dr. Bile! A young intern burst in, then froze in familiar confusion seeing both of them. The second, Nurse Rain clarified automatically, gesturing to the younger of the 2 doctors. Yes, right, sorry, the Regalian Medical Corps is asking about applying your research to their emergency response protocols. They want to know if... A crash from the physical therapy room interrupted them. They rushed to find Damien helping another patient who had stumbled during exercises.
I'm fine,
the construction worker insisted, already pushing himself up.
I just lost my balance.
Take it slow, Damien advised, demonstrating the movement properly. It took me weeks to get this stuff right. Faravian watched them work together, noting how their injuries had healed along nearly identical timelines. The consistency was beautiful from a research perspective. Predictable, documentable, reproducible results.
She would have loved this,
Dr. Bao I said quietly beside him.
She always said medical science needed more revolution and less tradition.
She also said the best discoveries come from watching rather than assuming, Faravian replied. She would always document everything. They finished together. Nurse Rain cleared her throat politely. The Centaurian delegation has sent their final arrival details. They're bringing their own research team. They have a proposal concerning the applications of nanotechnology and biomimicry.
Good,
Dr. Bile I said.
The more eyes on this, the better. We're going to need broad cooperation to implement these findings.
Assuming anyone believes them, Auburn pointed out. Some of the responses to your preliminary papers were pretty skeptical. They'll believe it when they see it for themselves, Faravian assured her. That's why we insisted on in-person observation protocols. Some things have to be witnessed to be understood. The observation gallery was packed with medical professionals from across the sector. Faravian watched them watching his patients, noting their reactions as Damien demonstrated a full range of motions and limbs that, by their medical understanding, should have required replacement.
The recovery rate is consistent across all documented cases, Dr. Bao I explained to the assembled researchers. Human healing processes follow predictable patterns that can be actively supported through proper medical intervention.
The key was changing our perspective, Faravian added. Instead of trying to replace damaged tissue, we focused on supporting natural regeneration. The Centaurian medical chief raised a manipulator.
But the energy requirements
are managed through their unique metabolism. My father asked me the same question, Faravian finished. We've documented the mechanism. The data's in your briefing packets. In the demonstration area below, Damien was working with their newest patients, 3 humans from a recent mining accident. Their injuries, while less severe than his had followed the same healing patterns they'd documented.
Notice the progressive improvement.
Dr. Bao I highlighted specific monitoring data.
Bone density increases, muscle tissue regenerates, nerve function returns, all without cybernetic intervention.
We've already modified our emergency protocols, a Regalian doctor noted. The preliminary results are promising. Supporting natural healing instead of rushing to artificial replacement has reduced recovery times by 40%. Although still nowhere near human records. Better, however, is that our patients get to keep their limbs afterwards. The cost in cybernetics has dropped significantly. Faravian's head crest rose with pride. The research was already saving lives, changing how the galaxy approached medical treatment. His father's feathers rustled with similar satisfaction. Dr. Bile, Nurse Rain called from the doorway. The first, she specified, managing not to smile as she is the one making the mistake for once. The Academy Board is ready for your presentation.
Excellent.
Dr. Bao I gathered his data crystals.
Faravian, continue with the demonstration. I'll handle the bureaucrats.
Actually, Nurse Rain interrupted. They want to speak with both of you. Something of a joint research grant. The 2 doctors exchanged looks. They'd submitted a proposal for expanding their human medical studies, but they hadn't expected a response so soon. Auburn took over the demonstration as they left, her practical knowledge of human biology making her an excellent presenter. They'd come a long way from those first confused days of observation.
Your findings are revolutionary,
the Academy Board chair began without preamble.
The implications for trauma treatment alone justify expanding the research.
However, Faravian's head crest flattened slightly. There was always a however.
We have some concerns about the scope of your proposal,
another board member added.
A dedicated multi-species facility for studying human medical applications? The cost is negligible compared to the current cybernetic replacement expenses.
Dr. Bile I interrupted.
The research pays for itself in reduced material costs alone.
And that's before considering the improved recovery times, Faravian added. Patients return to productive work months or years sooner than with traditional treatments. The Regalian data supports this, a third board member noted. Their emergency response modifications are showing remarkable results.
Which is precisely why we need to expand, Dr. Bao I pressed. Humans are spreading throughout the galaxy. Understanding their biology isn't just academic, it's a practical necessity.
And not just for the trauma treatment, Faravian continued. Their natural healing processes have applications for genetic disorders, degenerative conditions, and even basic surgical recovery. The board members exchanged looks. The chair shuffled some data crystals and then smiled. She would be proud, she said finally, looking between them. Helena always said medical science needed more revolutionaries. Faravian felt his father's feathers brush against his wing. A gesture of shared emotion he'd felt more recently in the last few months than he had since childhood, since she passed.
We have reviewed your proposal, the chair continued. The grant is approved. Full funding, with option for expansion based on results.
Neither Foravian could quite contain their head crests rising in excitement. The new Human Medical Research Center occupied an entire section of Station Medical 7, its specialized facilities humming with activity. Foravian adjusted his scanner settings as he made his final notes for their original case study. Damien's last checkup has confirmed what they already knew. Complete recovery, with bone density actually higher in the healed areas. Everything looks good, he confirmed, reviewing the data. Though I still want you checking in regularly. Long-term documentation is crucial for research.
Happy to help,
Damien said, rolling his shoulder with easy mobility.
Though I think you got plenty of other cases to study now.
He was right. The center currently hosted patients from 12 different colonial outposts, each contributing to their growing database of human healing processes. Their treatment protocols were being adopted across the sector, revolutionizing emergency medicine and trauma care. Dr. Bile, a young intern called from the doorway, and then quickly corrected herself.
The second. The Andromeda Medical Academy is requesting access to your latest findings. Something about applying human healing principles to xenobiological regeneration?
Send it to the main lab, Foravian instructed. The father's working on that project now. The intern hurried off, no longer confused by the two Dr. Biles. The staff had adapted to their dual leadership, just as galactic medicine was adapting to their discoveries. Hard to believe it's been 6 months, Auburn commented from her workstation, where she was compiling data for their next publication. Their original paper on human healing mechanisms had become the most cited medical research of the year. Time flies when you're revolutionizing medical science, Nurse Rain added dryly, but her pride in their accomplishments was obvious. Foravian found his father in the main lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing cellular regeneration patterns across different species. Dr. Bile I's feathers were slightly ruffled from hours of intense focus, a look that had become familiar over months of shared research.
The Regalian results are in, his father said without looking up. Their modified protocols are showing a 60% improvement in recovery rates now.
By supporting natural healing instead of replacing it, Foravian noted, just like the humans showed us.
Indeed,
Dr. Bile I finally said when he looked up from his work.
Your mother's portrait has been moved to the center's main entrance, by the way. The board thought it fitting, given her views on revolutionary medicine.
Foravian's head crest rose slightly. She would have loved all this. Yeah. The research, the discoveries.
Our cooperation,
his father added softly. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, each focused on their own aspects of the expanding research. The quiet was broken by Damien's voice from the corridor.
Last checkup done,
he announced. Heading back to active duty next week.
Already?
Dr. Bile I's head crest twitched.
We could find more tests to run.
Father, Foravian chided gently. We have to let our first case study actually leave eventually.
Fine,
Dr. Bile I grumbled.
But I expect regular updates on bone density maintenance. We need to know if that change is permanent or if the body reabsorbs the excess mass eventually.
I wouldn't dream of depriving you, Damien grinned. You know, Foravian said after Damien left, I never thanked you.
For what?
His father replied quizzically. For listening. For being willing to see something impossible and study it instead of dismissing it. His father's feathers rustled.
I should be thanking you for pushing me to look past my assumptions.
He paused, but added nothing. He didn't need to. They returned to their work, wings occasionally brushing as they moved between scanners and samples. Outside their lab, the center hummed with activity. Doctors, learning, patients, healing, medicine advancing. All because they'd taken the time to watch, to learn, to understand that sometimes the impossible was simply waiting to be discovered. And somewhere, Foravian liked to think Elena was watching them both.